The first half of the 1980s were a duration marked by a slew of internal readjustments for the United States, a notion enveloping both political and social schemes collectively. From a political lens, the emergence of Reaganomics, the intensification of the war on drugs, and the conservative domestic regime gestured towards the accumulation of sweeping political alterations. Socially, the open embrace and praise towards luxury events, materialism, and consumerism illustrates a clearly idealized life to strive for. Context for this ideal life to strive for throughout the decade comes from the burning fuse that was the Cold War. The blunt appropriation of natural rivalry between the U.S. and an evil empire, the Soviet Union, on part of Reagan, carved out years spent with significant spikes in military spending and excessive deployment of nuclear missiles in Europe. These tensions reveal a more nuanced explanation for a burrowing in things like consumerism or a complete conservative adaptation. These weren't for the long-term optimization of the U.S., nor were these actions taken as a means of exemplifying the pride of the present. They were means of comfort, of temporary serenity to turn away from the seeming imminence of all-out destruction and obliteration. Comic books throughout this period sought to grapple with not only the ongoing human struggle, but a specific feeling of futility linked to nuclear brinkmanship. In particular, reactionary to this period of volatility and span of nerve-wracking tension, the graphic novel, or then a monthly comic book series, Watchmen, was printed, written by Alan Moore with DC Comics as the publisher. The series was set in an alternate 1985 where superheroes exist as government-sponsored figures, deterring history and social activity to the very liking of politicians. With exploration of ethical ambiguity carving out the Cold War and provocations in the regard of human division, the book asserts itself as a piece of unflinching political commentary, representative not only of the 1980s, but also pretty much the entire preceding span of the Cold War. The book has extensive focus on the concept of nuclear brinkmanship as a method of exploring the perceived inevitability of human self-conducted decimation. The book applies the recurring motif of a doomsday clock. The doomsday clock is a mechanism that is intended to identify the time separating the present from our destined reckoning. The clock itself senses a personification of rational fear. It mirrors the accumulating nervousness surrounding the consolidation of immense power between the U.S. and Soviet Union, and the justifiable opposition to what would appear to be mutually assured destruction. The clock criticizes the feelings of righteousness embraced by both parties, the U.S. finding themselves to be the chariots of liberty and freedom, while the Soviets find themselves to be the epitome of full-scale dignity. In either case, despite their constant flocking into helpless society, universal annihilation awaits. The book has numerous religious undertones, managing to relate to American hubris and the inherent division of mankind. The character of Dr. Manhattan is central to the story. Though born immortal, after a nuclear accident, he is made superhuman with a god-mimicking array of abilities that prompts a gradual dissociation from humanity. Though Dr. Manhattan's presence itself provokes conversation in regard to existential responsibility, his application throughout the story ties into more practical nodes. Throughout the story, Manhattan is repeatedly shown to be strictly leveraged as a weapon to Americans. Though intense reverence and buckling at the knees is a bound occurrence, Manhattan is praised by the media, press, and government alike as a direct product of American exceptionalism. He is taken as the physical manifestation of destiny, a tangible product of righteousness, and an individual that now practically defines America as nation supreme. Furthermore, his actions in Vietnam towards the refusal, his narrative concealment of Watergate, and his contribution towards a perceived collective good with disregard for individual lives mirrors the actions of both Soviets and the U.S. in the Cold War alike. Both find themselves to be the perfect moral model and find themselves to be the epitome of nobility. They seek to reserve absolute power and stop at no immediate ethical boundary in the pursuit of an optimized reality of utilitarianism. The ending of the novel contributes to the adamant pursuit of preserving philosophy and the futility of the Cold War. The book ends with a surprisingly complex moral paradox. The default antagonist, Ozymandias, a super genius that seeks to emulate the glory of figures like Alexander the Great, kills millions in New York, staging the scene as the first strike of an imminent alien invasion. Temporarily, accumulates attention, bringing together countries thought to be central foes. This alone emphasizes the futility of an arms race, which is now exposed to be a mere demonstrative activity that actually does nothing to alert allies or, push apart enemies, and also exposes the fragile foundations of the conflict, where sparks of temporary diplomacy and flares of conflict will forever revolve sporadically. In this case, both futility and fragility that I just mentioned are treated as products of equally counted selfishness and egotism. The resolution of the conflict moves mountains from the context of humanity and the fate of the globe. A protagonist named Rorschach seeks to reveal the truthful construction of the conflict by shipping this journal to a newspaper. This action is reflective of the constant paradox of the human spirit, but more importantly, the inability to find utilitarian victory. It defamates the ideological combat of the Cold War as meaningless. Its only two feasible outcomes present themselves. Either annihilation ensues, or attention normalcy is imminent. No amount of power or manipulation can permanently overcome tendencies towards conflict. Humanity will always defer to a cycle of violence. Not only is the Watchmen a reflection of the tensions of the Cold War, but it is also intended to be a wake-up call from the detrimental comfort of consumerism and materialism. It demands attention towards the immediate human condition. It calls for all participants, all viewers, to evaluate the Cold War for what truly concerns the state of mankind.